Hello, folks. Welcome to Between Awesome and Disaster. This is your host, Will Carey. I appreciate you tuning in. I hope you are having an excellent beginning to March. Is it crazy that it is March already? Quarter one, almost on the edge here. Kind of insane to think about that. I'm also crazy to be describing it as quarter one, but that is how I think right now. Where am I? I am back home in New York City, and I am still wistfully thinking of my many adventures on my my honeymoon with my darling wife Chelsea. And one of the most, I'm gonna say, one of the experiences from that really stuck out to me. I said I would mention some of these on the podcast going forward. Of the many incredible things I saw, the one that really is, I think, going to stick with me for a while was going to an onsen for a couple of days, really at the base of Mount Fuji. And there was several moments where I was able to take in a clear view of Mount Fuji as the sun set while I was sitting in the rooftop onsen. That was a sight. It looked like something that was out of like a nature documentary or a National Geographic. I remember being a kid and flipping through my grandfather's National Geographics. A very well-traveled man. He was a Coast Guard captain who sailed through Antarctica, sailed ships back from Germany after World War II. Pretty amazing guy who I model a lot of my, I'm not gonna say not my behavior, but just my model of like of what a good man is. After Captain Gettle, but that was his name. So I think about that a lot, and it was just really out of sight. Like it's like my eyes, I couldn't believe that my eyes were telling me I was seeing what I was seeing. And what's funny is that I actually don't have any photos of that particular view, because I'm sure some of my viewers might be aware that in onsens in Japan, you're naked. And so I was the first of me and my wife to go in and do the rooftop onsen publicly. So honestly, I just kind of went with it. I was a little nervous at first, but once you realize everybody's doing that and nobody's being weird about it, it's not as weird as it might sound initially. So and obviously can't bring your phone into a place where everyone's naked. Gotta be respectful. So that is gonna exist in my memory as just one of those things that I can't believe I got to experience, and to just sit in all of this beautiful mountain will remain with me for a long time. And I'm delighted for the experience. Today on the show, my guest is a former stand-up comedian, radio host, and now author, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. My guest on the show today is Jason Lamb. Jason is the author of a new book called NoMeansNo, From Obscurity to Oblivion, an Oral History. Some of my more distinguished punk rock listeners probably have heard of this band, but I had never heard of the band NoMeansNo. And if you are like me and haven't, this is a deep dive that you're going to want to take, because it's a really interesting band with really interesting music, with a really interesting story. They hail from Victoria, British Columbia, which is an island near Vancouver, same place that Jason is from. And their music is a combination of punk rock with the improvisation and avant-gardeness of jazz. They did not sound like your typical hardcore band, like a Minor Threat kind of punk band. You could probably put them in a similar category to Minutemen if you're familiar with them. They were weird but amazing, and they made some incredibly great music and some great songs. and had a very long, successful touring career before being awarded at the Western Canadian Music Awards, and then quietly disbanding with no ill will between all the members. The model for how I think a band should exist. And Jason has interviewed an exhaustive list of folks not only in the band, but related to the band, fans of the band, a real luminaries of punk rock. This is a band that they love. And so this his book has just come out. It came out earlier this year. It's called No Means No: From Obscurity to Oblivion, an Oral History. I will have the link for it in the description if you want to order it. And Jason and I got to chatting about punk rock and small towns and the Canadian comedy scene. We talk a lot about his history leading into radio, as well as some tumultuous events that he's grappling with in his radio career right now. We're going to talk about that as well. But we're mostly going to talk about this very exciting, interesting time and this very cool, isolated punk rock scene that kind of developed in a sort of vacuum. They did not have a lot of outside influences, so the bands that came out of Victoria were really left to their own devices and their own experimentation, and their art was a direct expression of them, and it was for them and for their community that lived there who could go to the shows. So I really enjoyed getting to learn about this band. And Jason was an excellent. It was an excellent chat. So I'm going to share that with you folks right now, and I appreciate y'all being here to check it out. And if you like this, make sure you check out the link in the description for No Means No: From Obscurity to Oblivion. And let's talk to Jason Lamb. To Melanie about setting this up, one of the things she mentioned is that you'd been a comedian for a while. So she's like, "Oh, I think you guys will really hit it off." And my kind of passing familiarity with the greater Vancouver area, I'm looking forward to this, man. Thanks for doing it, Jason.
Yeah, for sure. My pleasure. She mentioned the same thing to me. So you're a stand-up as well, hey?
Yes, I've been a stand-up since 2007. I was a punk rocker before I was a stand-up, but been a
Yeah.
stand-up more than anything now, I think.
That's really cool. And you're in New York City, yeah?
Yeah, I've lived here
Yeah.
since 2010. So I have I started in Baltimore originally, and back when there was like
Right.
hardly any scene at all. And I saw a lot of parallels reading the book between my journey in stand-up comedy and then the story that you were telling of the band in the book here.
Sure. Yeah, I can see that. Absolutely. Yeah, I started stand-up in 1998
Oh wow.
in Vancouver. When I was living in Vancouver, I was waiting tables and doing stand-up, and I was pretty serious about it for a long time. Toured with Yuck Yucks, the big
Hmm.
comedy chain up here in Canada. Uh, and then I sort of And then what happened is I went back to school for journalism to get into radio because it was like becoming apparent that maybe I won't be a famous rich comedian, so I don't really want to be a waiter until I'm 80, you know. So
Right.
um, yeah, and then I ended up moving back here to Victoria, which is just on the island here across the water from Vancouver, and I still do it. I still do stand up occasionally, but it's just a real part-time hobby thing for me now. It's not any kind of ambitious career goal anymore. I like doing it. It's you get the bug forever, I think, once you've been up on stage and felt that. But
Sure.
yeah, but I've kept busy with the book and other stuff.
Yeah, I love stand up to this day. As I've gotten older, I've certainly branched out. Like I also do like lights and sound for sketch comedy groups at a theater
Oh,
in New
cool.
York. And I love this. I love the skill set that stand up has provided me because I know lots of great stand ups that are now writers on shows. I also know stand ups that are on big network TV shows. So like I
Sure.
love watching all the paths in the grass that my various peers have taken, and my part of my path is this podcast.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. And it's true. Like the skills that you learn, joke writing and then performing are transferable to all kinds of stuff. Like I mean, even the book that I wrote, um, the No Means No book, it's like, you learn early on the brevity of words and, like, word economy and not being,
Yeah.
you know, getting the point across quickly and as simply as possible. And I think that helped me with my ability to edit this book down to what it was. So that everything there is like meat and not fluff, right?
Hmm.
I think that's I think that, and also I think it just gave me confidence in my general life that allowed me to be good at doing things like interviews, which I did a lot of for this book
Hmm.
and have done over the years. So yeah,
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I want to get into you about like interview technique and your journalist background, and especially this book. Before I get into that, I want to say I really enjoyed it as a
thank you.
fan of punk rock, and I'm gonna fully admit to not being cool enough to know who No Means No were before I read this
You're not
book.
alone. Yeah,
So I did an
yeah,
extensive deep dive into listening to a lot of their music and everything that you say in the book about how uniquely singular they were as a band. Like I was you painted such vivid pictures with the descriptions of the scene in Victoria that time and all of these punk shows that got put on in like abandoned warehouses and basement shows. Like
yeah,
I was totally transported to being in those rooms, and I could absolutely imagine that they did not sound anything else like the kind of bands that they would be playing with, especially if they were embraced by a burgeoning hardcore scene. Like they would very
yeah,
much stick out, but in like the coolest way. I could see like a lot of punks being like, "Huh, this is different, but I like it." That's my
yeah, yeah.
my squatter punk
Well,
voice.
yeah. Thanks for saying that because it was really important for me. I didn't know if I was going to be it like means a lot that you said that because I wanted to get across to people who didn't grow up in Victoria what it was like because it was a very unique scene and I think it's a really overlooked scene historically. Everyone we all know about the Seattle grunge stuff and the New York and the LA punk scenes and even Vancouver to a point, but Victoria was pretty important. A lot of really cool shit came out of here and it was a really bizarre, kind of cool, unique time. So I'm glad that that came across to you. Um, but yeah, No Means No. I think it's a mentioned by I think it's Ford Pier in there at one point says they could have easily ended up in like the art rock kind of scene that was also happening in Vancouver at the time when once
Hmm.
they got over there. Which eh, if that had happened, they would not have had the same career at all or the same success. But the fact that they were embraced early on by the punk scene, the hardcore scene,
Yeah.
made all the difference because it just opened it all up. And that's, why they ended up on Alternative Tentacles and touring everywhere because they weren't really, you couldn't really pigeonhole them into, they didn't sound like a typical punk band, but they didn't sound like a typical anything band. They were very unique. So it is almost, um, I don't know what the word is. They felt like they were punk rockers, so they belonged in that scene, but it
Yes.
could have easily gone the other way.
Totally. Like
Yeah,
there's a certain kind of inherent vibe and attitude to punk that even if you're not like, even if you don't sound like Minor Threat or the Dead Kennedy or
yeah,
Black Flag, there's a certain sort of inherent attitude that I think punks can pick up on. Like the Minutemen, I would never really describe as sounding like a punk band, but they were very much
no,
a punk band, if that makes any sense. And I feel like No Means No
hundred
kind
percent,
of are in that same sort of mold.
absolutely. I think I agree with that, 100% for sure.
So I'm curious to ask you, and I want to trace kind of this story for the book. So growing up in Victoria, is
Mm.
this? I almost feel like maybe the history of No Means No might also be. I wonder if this is any part your personal history as well. Like when you're growing up in Victoria, I, I imagine it's very different than it is now. But when did you find this underground music, local music that was happening in Victoria?
Yeah, probably around grade 9-ish. So that would have been, God, 1984 or
Uh
so.
huh.
Um, so punk was already very much a thing. I mean, I'd heard the Sex Pistols on the radio,
Right.
and the Clash and the Ramones and stuff. But other than that, I was pretty naive to it all. And so I was just, yeah, first or second year of junior high. Um, the first thing I ever heard, I think, was the Dayglow Abortions, which is another Victoria band.
Mm-hmm.
And then I heard the Dead Kennedys, and I went out and bought In God We Trust Incorporated, the Dead Kennedys
Yeah.
EP. And that was really kind of the kickoff for me. I was like, oh wow, this is like different and scary and mean and awesome and aggressive, and I just loved it. I just immediately loved it. And I started leaning towards that kind of music, and then I didn't go to any shows for probably another year or so. Um, First No Means No track I ever heard was Dad, which is one of their more well-known songs. Somebody had it on a mixtape. I remember listening on Walkman headphones in a
Uh-huh.
in the auditorium at school, and I was like, "What the hell is this? This is amazing." But that said, like I never really looked like a punk. I guess I just looked like kind of a skitty guy, but
Mhm.
I never had the mohawk or the spiky leather jackets and stuff. I didn't really
The battle vest and
dive
the
into that world with the yeah, all that stuff, the patches and stuff. That wasn't my thing. I was more the kind of kid that I was like a class clown, and I was a kid that got along with everybody kind of. I didn't really belong to any clique, in those days. And the high school I went to had all of those. There was preppies and there was jocks and there was rockers and
Mhm.
stoners and punks. But everybody kinda got along in a strange way. It wasn't that divisive or weird, and I was just kind of a nerdy, funny guy that got along with everyone. But I was um, definitely into the punk rock music, and then I finally went to go see a show, and Dayglows were the first show I ever saw,
Oh,
at
wow.
an all ages venue, and yeah, it was insane. I mean, I was just it's hard for, like, much younger people to know, like it was actually scary, like, but it was
Mhm.
but it was fascinating and just, like, it just got your blood pumping, like, it was you're like, "Something really bad could happen, someone could get hurt, but this is so amazing." Like, the aggression and the sound, um, it just took me, and I was hooked completely, and from there, I just went to as many shows as I could and
Uh-huh.
became a big No Means No fan pretty quick and saw them every chance I got. Yeah.
Oh, that's
But I was a little late, like, I was 84, 85, so there was already quite a scene happening here
yeah, I
by then.
remember you also kind of saying that it seems like it takes time for things to make their way up to Canada, especially back in the days
Yeah,
before the internet and everything you could kind of
for sure.
learn everything geographically all the time. So okay, so you're in high school, so you start going to punk shows. Was there ever was there ever a chance? Did you ever like play in bands too, or were you just kind of like one of those guys you'd see at shows frequently?
Just a guy that you would see at shows. I never that's yeah, it's funny, like, I've spent my almost my entire life, um well, yeah, being really into music and going to see as many shows as I could, and now the last sort of 20 years of my life working in the industry and radio and everything else. But I've never really been a musician. No, I tried to play drums for a while
Hmm.
when I was younger, but it was like I wasn't even in a band. I had a couple friends screwed around in the garage and stuff, but no, I've never actually been a musician. Weirdly, my son, who's actually 16 this week, is an incredible musician. He
Oh
plays
wow.
bass in a punk band. He plays trombone in jazz at school. He's like really good. And it didn't come from me because I don't have musical ability whatsoever.
Oh, interesting.
I
But
just like it.
well,
Yeah.
just in that description, I think maybe it might have come from you because when you say punk and jazz, I feel like those are the two signs of the no means no coin. Because if I was
True
gonna
that. Yeah.
and if I was gonna describe no means no to anybody who hasn't heard them before, who might be listening to this, I would almost say that that's kind of what they are. They're sort of like I would describe them as there is definitely this like very intense, aggressive, like socio aware punk side of them. And then there's this sort of like weird avant garde side that kind of gets out at certain times. Like songs like Body Bag, that one
Yeah.
particularly stuck out to me because you have this almost like sort of like spoken word monologue happening over this killer bass over this like really cool bass groove. I also loved how you said in the book that like oh bass players loved no means no, no means no because I
Yeah. Yeah.
listened to that because I play bass and I was like oh yeah
Okay.
that's super sick. So there's just I'm very curious. What do you think made this scene in Victoria so like uniquely singular? Is it due to the that kind of isolation of it, like that it's kind of removed from the rest of
Yeah.
Canada? What makes
I
it
think
so
so too.
unique?
Yeah, it is very unique, and I think that's exactly what it is, and I think that is also touched on in the book a little bit. Um, yeah, not only was Canada a little late getting stuff, but like Victoria particularly, because there's something. It's also almost like ethereal or something. It's weird because we're on an island,
Hmm.
and Victoria's on the tip of the southern tip of this little island. And again, you're right. Like there was no internet, no cell phones. People weren't as connected. You had to actually write letters to people or go to them, and so there was a very real feeling of isolation. Like we weren't quite connected to the rest of the country.
Hmm.
Um, and the Vancouver punk scene was in full bore by 1980, 81, when the Victoria scene just started. Um, so they had DOA and all these bands, and with obviously with some exceptions, most of the bands in Vancouver sounded like DOA. Like they were all trying to do that sound. Oh, okay, this is the West Coast, uh, Western Canadian hardcore punk sound, and DOA is the top tier, and we're all going to kind of try to do that.
Right.
Well, we didn't have that influence here, and when I say we, this is before my time by a few years, but so the bands that were coming up and starting in Vancouver in Victoria didn't have a reference. Like they weren't influenced by anything because they were getting everything so late and just kind of piecemeal. And so bands like the Neos, which was like these three teenagers, they decided we're going to play music as fast as we can and do like until we pass out. And they would literally like wear parkas, and turn the heat up to as hot as it would be, and just play the
Whoa.
fastest possible punk, metal, thrash, whatever you want to call it, until they couldn't do it anymore. Like 25 minutes of just insanity, and then they'd fall down. And that led them to be very influential down the road. They didn't even last for more than a couple of years as a band, but they're cited by like Megadeth and bands like that of like, yeah, these guys were maybe the first speed metal band or speed punk band, if you will.
Yeah.
Then you had like the Dayglow Abortions who were crossing over metal and punk together, which hadn't really been done before in any real way. And then No Means No, who just like they're jazz trained, John, the drummer, anyway, was jazz trained, traditional grip drummer,
Hmm.
really skilled. And then his brother, who was just into everything, Rob was into everything and like reading philosophy and like putting all that stuff into a blender and then making this music. So and there's other examples too, like other weird bands. So everybody in Victoria, all the bands were different. Like there wasn't a Victoria sound. It was just young guys and girls trying something different. Like what is punk to us? I don't know. Let's sound weird and see how it goes. I'm not sure if maybe I'm rambling here, but that's kind of what it was. It was isolation, and so they were forced to be unique.
Yeah.
And it wasn't all good,
Oh, sure.
but yeah, but then once the venues started up and there was places to play and people had basement parties and stuff, there was a really cool community where you could go up and do anything you wanted and nobody would really judge you. You may suck, um, but people would still come out and see you because at least you're trying something.
That's that's really cool. I love everything about this because it's not like because I feel like as soon as grunge became known, everybody started just directly copying that, and thus it kind of loses its inherent impact. So
Totally.
this idea of kind of being like remotely isolated, and I have this ongoing doctoral thesis I've been working on this podcast, is that small town isolation or like comfortable suburban settings is like a perfect breeding ground for punk rock or for creating some sort of DIY scene because there's nothing to do, so you got to make your own fun.
That's exactly it too. Another thing that's also I can't remember who says it in the book, but Victoria is a pretty middle class town. We're the capital of BC, so there's a lot of government work, and a lot of people work for the government here.
Hmm.
And it's a pretty cushy, it's a beautiful little city. It's very back then. It's different now. Victoria's changed a lot over the last few decades, but back then it was a sleepy little town and a tourist town. Like we were known as being sort of an old English town. Like we actually had double decker buses downtown, and people go for high tea, and that was the
Oh
whole like.
wow.
But people who lived here didn't do that. We didn't. That's not how it was. It was a facade for tourists to come and go. Oh, isn't this quaint little British town? So the young people here they weren't street kids. They came from middle class suburban families, but there was nothing to do. Like it was boring, and so they made their own fun, and that's exactly. So I think your thesis is right on the money because that's if you live in New York City or you live in Vancouver or you live in Toronto, there's tons of shit to do all the time, and you can go off and do all kinds of fun stuff. When you don't have that ability, you instead you kind of come together as people and your peers, and you go, well, what are we gonna do? Well, I don't know. Let's play some music or let's do that, and have a party.
Yeah, there's kind of like a purity of intent, I think, to those kinds of scenes as well, because there's not any sort of like thought of the broader industry or of music industry or of like, oh, how do we sound
No,
appealing to record labels or how do we get on the radio? It's a hey, I want to make something cool. Oh, well, let's do it together, and then let's
yeah,
share it with the community in a way. And I'm very like big on like just the building of the community around this music. I also
yeah,
the other picture that kept coming through my head as I was when you were describing the Victoria scene early on, I kept thinking of what my closest comparison, because I haven't been to Victoria specifically, is what Granville Island used to look like before it became like this
yeah,
fancy markets and performance arts theaters. I'm
right.
picturing like the graffitied up kind of maybe slightly graffitied up like warehouses and like I was walking I remember walking around there and like finding like some brewery and thinking, oh, you could have a rager of a show there in the 80s, I bet.
Totally, yeah, and there was stuff like that here too, for sure.
Uh-huh.
And, there was also a darker side to stuff in Victoria back in those days too, like, some of the young people decided that they were so bored they wanted to just be assholes, and
Mm-hmm.
there was a gang called the James Bay Boys. James Bay is one of the areas of Victoria,
Uh-huh.
near downtown, and they were just brutal dudes, like, they were rugby guys, and they would go around on a Friday, Saturday night drinking and beating the shit out of people for no reason at all. Often people like punk rockers who looked different or looked queer or
Yeah.
whatever. And, that kind of stuff was going on too. So it wasn't all um, puppy dogs and rainbows, so there was this underlying kind of nastiness that was going on at the same time too. And strangely, when punk started in Victoria, I think I can say this accurately. When punk started in Victoria, it was a separate thing. So there
Yeah.
was already there were some metal bands. There was obviously a rock and roll scene or whatever you want to call that. Um, but it didn't take too long, just because I think sort of in a practical way, there just wasn't that many places to play. There wasn't that many kids to go to shows. So pretty early on, the metal sort of stoner rocker scene and the punk scene kind of melded here,
Right.
and crossed over, and that's bands like the Dayglows were hugely important for that because they were kind of appealing to both.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would go to a show and there'd be a metal band and a punk band and some weird new wavy goofy band on the same bill, and so and that kind of brought peace a little bit to a lot of what was going on. There was no longer these scenes that were clashing. It was like, yeah, we're all just want to go see some music and have a good time.
Exactly. It's
Uh,
like we got to band
yeah,
together. We're isolated here. No, that makes total
yeah,
sense. I almost think, yeah, kind of like I imagine the Dayglows. They kind of sound like um, Motorhead. Like punks and metalheads always argue over if are Motorhead metal or are they punk, and it varies
yeah,
depending on who you say. Um,
absolutely.
yeah, and similarly, like I feel like every punk scene, like I feel like in the '80s, like punks had to fight all the fucking skinheads and Nazi assholes that tried
Yeah,
to infiltrate, and that still goes on. That still,
it does. And even when I started going to shows a few years later, like sort of mid '80s, we had a little contingent of skinhead Nazi guys here in Victoria, but it was looking back, it was ridiculous because there was literally like a handful of them, and they would come to shows and try to cause shit, but they would always just get thrown out and go on their merry way because they were so like they were so outnumbered, right?
right.
Uh, but that just speaks to like everybody thinking that you have to. I don't know. Well, I guess they're racist assholes probably in the first place, but just
Yes,
glomming onto a thing just to do it.
to start
Um,
shit. That's all there.
To start shit. There's always gonna be people like that, right? But it was never that bad of a situation here. Like I say, they were definitely the minority, big time.
Right on. And how long were you in Victoria before? Because you moved to Vancouver eventually. When did that happen?
I moved to Vancouver when I was like 23, so like in 94.
Okay, so
So I
in
was here, yeah.
and I'm curious, and I am going to ask you about the book, but I do want to talk about stand up too in Canada
Of course,
also, um,
sure.
because I'm very curious. Like late '90s, I know that the stand up comedy boom at this point, as a whole, is like way in the rearview mirror. At least down
Yeah.
in the United States. So I'm curious, when you started doing comedy in the late '90s, what sort of venues existed for you to do stand up? I know Yuck Yucks is, I
Yep.
guess, probably one of the bigger club chains like around Canada. But was there any sort of like alternative scene for comedy in Canada in the '90s, or was it just like Yuck Yucks and maybe a few other
Yeah.
places?
No, there when I started in 98, there was still a very strong comedy scene in Vancouver.
Hmm.
Um, there was the Yuck Yucks Club there. They were kind of they're the pro club, the professional club, and it was the largest comedy chain in Canada. I think technically they still are. They're not as excuse me. Uh, they're not as powerful, if you will, as they used to be. Like they used to be a whole thing. Like if you got on the roster for Yuck Yucks, then you were like on your way and you were going to be able to tour all over the country. And
Hmm.
it's dampened down a lot. And again, I'm not really that connected to the scene anymore. But back then, oh, for sure, there was comedy every night, if you knew where to go. There was coffee shop open mics, alternative shows, and really the big show that went on for years was a place called the Urban Well, and it was on Tuesday nights, and they did two shows. They did like a early and a late show, and a comedian by the name of Brent Butt was the MC of those shows. He went on to big fame in Canada. I
Uh-huh.
don't know if you've heard of him down
That
there or
name
not, but
sounds vaguely familiar to me.
yeah, he had a really successful sitcom called Corner Gas that he did for a bunch of
Uh-huh.
years. Really funny guy, really nice guy. When he started out in Toronto, he's from Saskatchewan originally, but then he went to Toronto. He was the warm-up guy for the Kids in the Hall when they were doing their TV series there. And then he moved back to Vancouver and he started up this comedy night, and it was really, really cool. That was the Tuesday night where like every comic in Vancouver would go to that show, whether they were on the show or not.
Uh-huh.
And it was like I say, it was two shows each night, and it would be sort of six or seven or even eight or nine comics doing sort of 5 minute sets, and then a headliner, and Brent would MC it. And like during those days, like Sarah Silverman would show up if she was in town. I met Kevin Nealon there.
Uh-huh.
Um, Robin Williams came by a few times because
Oh wow.
he was in Vancouver a lot. He filmed a lot of movies there. I'm not just dropping names, but it was a
Oh
really
no.
cool scene.
That's awesome.
Um, and these people would pop in and do sets, and I learned a lot. And it was a place where young guys who were just starting out could rub elbows with like the established headliners in Canada who were a name here, maybe not recognizable down there so much, but guys that were touring, headlining Yuck Yucks all across the country and stuff. So that was huge. And then yeah, there were lots of places, um, and I got on the Yuck Yucks roster. I never really went all the way across the country. I always did what they call the Western Canadian run. So it was
Hmm.
like BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan. Sometimes you go over to Winnipeg, but it was like a almost 2 month long tour.
Oh wow.
Um, and that was insane. Like that was an experience. I did like six of them over a few years.
Wow.
Um, driving, and Canada's a big country, so we're talking like sometimes like 12-hour drives between gigs
Uh-huh.
in the snow, and oh my God, I wouldn't want to do it again, but it was an awesome experience.
Yeah, that's some real
Yeah,
like those are those kinds of stories, those sort of like get in the van kind of stories that like
yeah,
really I think kind of their character building really define who you are. I'm imagining also like I I don't know what like Friday late show at Yuck Yucks in like Saskatchewan might be like if it's as rowdy
yeah.
as maybe some of the sets I've done, but
Oh yeah,
I'm picturing, oh my God, I'm picturing like the sports bars and the kind of like biker bars that I would do when I was like first starting out. And
Uh-huh.
I'm picturing like a Thursday night in Cal. I don't know if it's in Calgary, and there's just like a bunch of people like just daring you to be funny, and you just kind of have to
Yeah.
like succeed
Oh,
or run for your life.
yeah. 100%. Yes. I'm sure that experience is just worldwide for comics. But yeah, those kind of places, those rough and tumble places where it's like they're just sitting there with their arms crossed, like,
Yep.
okay, you're gonna try to make me laugh. All right, try, go for it. And if not, I'm gonna like just stare you down and heckle at you and make your life miserable. And I mean, my God, bombing in front of some of those crowds was the worst feeling of all, right?
Uh
But
huh.
if you could get them, it was the best feeling, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, there was notorious places too, like when you went on these runs, you didn't just play the nice clubs. Like the big clubs were like Vancouver was always an amazing show because it's a big, awesome club.
Mm-hmm.
Calgary's a big Yuck Yucks club, still is, and it was usually quite good. Edmonton had a really good club, etc. Saskatoon, Saskatchewan actually has a really nice club. But then you had to do all the in between places, which was like
Right.
Cranbrook, BC, and Grand Prairie, Alberta, and Fairview, Alberta, where you're going up north, like where the oil field people are, and
Right. Like the
it was
Alabama of
sketchy,
Canada.
man. Yeah, like you were like, I think I just need to go straight back to my hotel room and not hang out with these people afterwards because I might get stabbed.
Oh
Yeah.
my god, yeah. I had that feeling walking around like East Hastings in Vancouver. I'm just like, oh boy.
Um, yeah.
um,
I've done there was shows down there too back in the day. Oh my God.
oh wow,
Yeah.
that sounds gnarly. I see like some kind of parallel experience, some parallel experiences here between like what No
Oh,
Means No
definitely.
we're going through. Um,
Right. Yeah. Same kind of thing, right? You're playing to 5 people sometimes, right?
mhm.
Or some sketchy, weird place. Um, actually, I'll tell you something really funny. It's not in the book, and I wish it was because I literally learned about this yesterday.
Oh my gosh, well
But
we
what
can
a
talk about
story!
it
So
now.
yeah, yeah, here you go. You're gonna get a little exclusive here because this should have. I really wish this has got in the book, but I didn't. He didn't tell me till yesterday. So Tom Holliston, who was the second guitar player for No Means No, he told me yesterday they played some kind of warehousey gig in Kelowna, BC. Kelowna's a fairly decent sized town, sort of plopped in the middle of BC.
Mhm.
And they were setting up to play, and the cops came, and the guy that was running the show had stolen a bunch of construction materials from across the street to build the stage for the show.
Uh-huh.
And the police were like, "You stole all the stuff from the we have you on surveillance camera. You stole all," and they're like, "Oh," and so they let the show happen. And then at the end of the show, they arrested the guy and they made everybody dismantle the stage and bring all the stuff back across the street to the construction site and return it.
That's great. I love
Yeah, that's a pretty good story.
yeah, that is just such a I love everything about that. That is that like sort of like DIY ingenuity. It's like I imagine it
Yeah,
reminds me of this like episode of The Sopranos. Like, oh, you we stole. I stole this car. Oh wait, well you got to get me a new one. They just like spray paint a car the right color.
that's right. Yeah, yeah.
That's I love stories like that. I feel like punk bands and comedians have lots of these similar stories because I feel like they get thrown into these sort of like sink or swim performance environments that I feel like
Yeah.
you would not ask like a ballet company to perform on a stage of stolen lumber. You know what I mean?
No, you would not. Exactly. Yeah. The parallels between the stand-up life and the punk rock touring life are pretty incredible. Very similar experiences. I've talked to these guys about that stuff too. Like
Hmm.
the weird people you meet, the sketchy situations you end up in, the shows that, you know, go terribly or the shows that you don't think are going to go well and end up going really well. It's just it's and just the road warrior stuff, like just the way you kill time in a car for hours with some dude you don't really know that well, that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
It's it's pretty wild.
Oh my god, yeah. And did you get to see them during this era of you as a touring comic at all?
Oh yeah, definitely. I didn't know them then at all.
Hmm.
But oh yeah, I mean, once I started seeing No Means No shows in the mid '80s, I just would see them every time they came through town. So whether I was living in Victoria or Vancouver, I actually did live in Kelowna too for a little while. Saw them there. I've seen them also down in Seattle and all up and down Vancouver Island, and yeah, oh yeah, right up until they. I mean, I saw them right up until they retired in 2016.
Amazing. And the other
Yeah,
thing I noticed about them is like they seem like if I was going to teach a class on how to be a great band, they seem like they would be a great example to follow because they literally did some every it's they did like everything right at every like stage. They started in the DIY scene. They were good, and then cool people just realized they were good, and then you get on alternative tackles. Then they just worked their asses off, played incredibly hard. The other part I
yeah,
also love is they didn't baby their musical instruments. They were tools that they beat the shit out of, and
they sure
and I
did. Yeah,
love I
yeah,
love that. And then literally just like there's no like van explosion, there was no OD, there was no like fuck you. Like I know
yeah.
there was an era when there was tensions, but they all seemed to kind of like run the course and then be recognized. And then, like, I think the quote from Jello in the book is went out with dignity.
That's right. Yeah, Jello talks about how they were all at the end of the day, they're all adults. You know, there was no sniping each other. There was no big drama. I mean,
Hmm.
yeah, a lot of it is because it was two brothers who already loved each other, and and mind you, the brothers don't always end up so well if you look at like Oasis and stuff
Oh
like
my
that.
God.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's funny. Like they a lot of it stems from Rob Wright. He was kind of the engine main leader of the band, if you will.
Hmm.
I think that's fair to say. Um, they were so adamant about doing things their own way, not having to answer to anybody, not having to kowtow to any record label or management or industry bullshit, and um, and also just they wanted to be nice guys, and so they made a lot of really close friends early on that remained their friends right until today. Because they were respectful, they were friendly, they did things like do the dishes when they would stay at someone's house
Yeah.
in you know Germany, some little town or whatever. And they just got a reputation of being easy to work with, professional. There was no big drug stuff. Like they all like to drink beer and smoke some weed and stuff, but like yeah, that wasn't part of their thing. They weren't rock stars. They didn't dress like rock stars. They didn't, there was many instances early on where they would show up to a show and they'd be like, "Well, where's the band?" And I'm like, "We are the band." "What? You're the band?" Like, and you've got gray hair and you're wearing a sweater. Like, what the fuck? And then they would get up on stage and melt faces and be like, "Oh shit, okay, that's what's going on here." Very different. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever seen like maybe on online somewhere you might I've seen this meme of like if the guitarist in the band looks like this, you're gonna die in the pit. It's usually like someone that looks like you or me uh or the
Yeah.
no means no. It's like if someone in your band has like glasses like this or looks or like Milo in the Descendants, like he's a
Yeah.
biologist, he could be your science teacher, and then he gets on
Yeah.
stage and is just a possessed punk rock animal. Like
Absolutely.
they like
Yeah.
surprise punks is very much a thing that'll be my next research.
Your next thesis? Yeah, I like that.
Exactly.
I like that very much. I think you're onto something
I,
there.
I
It's
think
true.
so.
Well, because they didn't need to prove anything. They didn't need to look any way because they knew the music would speak for itself, right? They knew that once they got up on stage, people would dance and love it, and they knew they were good, and they didn't need to, have any flourishy stuff around it. It was
Hmm.
just like, yeah, here we are. We'll play some music.
Absolutely. So I want to ask you. So now that so you're doing the circuit in Yuck Yucks, and then eventually this decision comes to you go to journalism, and now and you work in radio now.
Yeah. So the way that went down is, yeah, I was waiting tables, doing stand up. I was married, and I just kind of like, okay, I got to do something with my life here as a backup plan because comedy is probably not going to be paying my bills forever or ever.
Right.
So I don't like waiting tables anymore. This is bullshit. And so I went back to school. I got a broadcast journalism degree.
Hmm.
Um, And then my first job was as a reporter on a radio station in Kelowna. And so I moved my wife and myself to Kelowna, and I worked there for 2 years. And then we had a baby there, and didn't really like living there a whole lot. Like we made some good friends, and it was a good first radio job to have, but
Right.
it wasn't a great town to live in. We didn't really like it, so we wanted to come back to either Vancouver, where we had been living before, or back to Victoria, my hometown. And so the first job that I got offered was back here in Victoria, also as a reporter for a classic rock station called The Q. And so we once again we moved back over. Now we have a baby, and that was in 2008.
Hmm.
And within a few months of doing that, the morning show co-host on a radio station called The Zone, which is across, like literally across the hall from the Q. There's two radio stations in one building owned by the same people. So the co-host, she was calling in sick a lot and stuff, and so they got me to fill in, and eventually offered me that full-time job. And so I went from being a reporter to being now a co-host, and I still read the news in the
Hmm.
mornings. But me and this guy Dylan Willows were the new morning show on the Zone, and we had this weird chemistry right away, me and Dylan,
Hmm.
and that was almost 16 years ago now. And we were the number one station in the city. Like we're a thing, and
That's great.
um, I can get heavy with you for a minute if you want. I was telling you before we started the interview about how messed up everything is in my life right now.
Uh-huh.
Well, one of the things is, this is really bad, but my co-host Dylan, he's got cancer now, and
Oh,
it was a um, resurgence of cancer that he had like 25 years ago, but it's back again, and it's bad. It's terminal.
oh
So
goodness.
he's actually finished at the Zone now. He had to step down to be with his family for the next. He's not even sure. Several months or a year maybe to live, and so
Oh wow.
everything is all topsy turvy because I'm now. They've put me into afternoons just to give me a bit of a break, and because I'm going through bereavement, and
Of course.
there's a couple concerts coming up that we've put together for him in a couple weeks, that he's going to be at, and blah blah blah. Anyway, that's what's going on. So it's crazy little ride that I'm on right now.
Oh goodness
So my
gracious.
future in radio is uncertain. Like, I mean, I'll stay in radio, but whether I'm going to end up doing the morning show with somebody else, or if I'm going to stay on afternoons, or who knows.
Oh goodness. I'm
That's
I'm so
I
sorry you're
even
having
answered
to
the
deal
question.
with that.
Oh,
Um,
thanks. Yeah, no, it's crazy, but
and
I'm doing all right.
well, that's
Yeah.
well, it's good. Well, maybe if we can, if there's something I can help share that would maybe help for publicity for that concert or something, please let me know. Because
Yeah, sure. I will. I mean, they're both sold out, so there's not really, you don't really need to.
well,
I
that's
appreciate it though.
that's good. Glad to hear that.
Yeah,
Well,
it's a great thing. Yeah. So it's a very strange time for me because I've got my regular job stuff is all, messy, and my friend is dying and it's awful. But then I got this book that's like getting a really good response, and that's really exciting. Um, my wife and I are separated now. That's been a year and a half, but that's good. And
hmm,
my kid's awesome. So I've got like all this really great stuff, and then all this like weird, tragic stuff going on.
that's kind of the theme of what I talk about on this podcast a lot. That's where the whole title
I
comes
know.
from. Oh my, it's like
Yeah,
everything can be great and awful at once, and everything can be depressing and joyous. It is. Uh,
it's true.
that's just
Life.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's more or less my overall thesis statement on what being a human on Earth is. Um, well,
I think that's
I
true.
hope that there's. I just hope that there's a dignified. I just hope that your friend is able to enjoy the time he has left. I'm really sorry to hear
He
about that
is.
and that you're going through
Well,
that.
thank you. He's a really, really great guy, and he's also very in tune guy, and he's very the way he's dealing with it all is really inspiring. His wife is amazing too, and he's surrounded by a great family and friends, and all the support that we have just from our listeners and community and stuff too. He's dealing with it in the best way possible. Like it's actually really quite something to see. So he's had a great life, but he's only 44 years old, and fucked up
That
that
is that is fucked up.
kind of stuff happens. Am I allowed to swear, by the way? Because I already
Oh
have
fuck
like
yeah,
many
yeah,
times.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Well,
okay, good.
that's one of the podcasting. I don't know I don't think the FCC reaches up there, but you wouldn't get in trouble for cursing on my podcast.
No, it's a podcast. Yeah,
Yeah.
we have our Canadian version of the FCC. It's called the CRTC, the Canadian Radio and Telecommunications
Mhm.
um, Corporation. Anyway, yeah, they're the ones who get yeah, because we get in trouble if we swear on the regular radio,
Right.
but only if people complain. That's the weird little thing up here. It's like you can
Interesting.
say whatever you want. There's actually no law against saying profanity on the airwaves. It's only when somebody then complains about it that you get in trouble. It's really weird.
Interesting. Is this also the
I
same
know.
organization that requires like a certain amount of Canadian bands get played on the radio? Is this that same
Yeah,
organization?
CanCon. Yeah, Canadian content. You have to play 35% Canadian content on radio and TV if you're a radio station up here. Yeah.
Fascinating. I'm so intrigued by radio because I really love I listened to a lot of it. I'm also curious, like, do you have like a radio voice that is different from your speaking voice? Because I feel like most of the drive time DJs, at least the ones I grew up listening
Yeah.
to, always do this kind of voice.
Yeah. Oh, right. You no, I sound like this. And actually, I think that's one of the reasons why people like our show is because um, Dylan and I are just kind of real guys on the radio. We're not like, fart noises, wah, wah, and we're doing all that stupid radio shit.
Yeah,
We're not radio guys like that. So,
you are
I mean,
guys
we
on the
do fart
radio.
jokes sometimes. We're guys on the radio. We talk about real stuff, and we're funny and goofy, and sometimes there's toilet humor and there's dumb shit. But like, we're real guys, and I think that people pick up on that, and that's why I think we stand out a little bit.
I,
Not to toot the horn, but
well, I've
yeah,
certainly picked that up in the time we've been chatting. Like you definitely strike me like if I was sitting next to you at a bar, I bet we'd be good friends by the end of the night if I didn't know you.
absolutely,
And
yeah.
so this
If it wasn't 10 in the morning, I would cheers you with a beer, but I got water right now.
exactly. I've got this. I have this water bottle I got in Miyajima in Japan when I was on my
Oh, wow,
honeymoon most recently. It's an
that's very cool.
island.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you, thank you. It's an island that's populated by wild deer. So you just are like walking around, looking, going into shops, and there's just deer chilling.
Really,
Yeah,
that's so
it was
cool. Yeah.
pretty wild place. It's a short ferry ride from Hiroshima, so we just popped over real quick while we were going to a bunch of different places.
I've always wanted to go to Japan. It's on the bucket list for sure.
Well, I have recommendations for when you're going because I've been
Okay.
fortunate enough to go a few times, see a lot of that country. So I got you,
Oh,
Jason.
nice. Right on.
And
Okay, sounds good.
yeah, and so this job is when you actually met No Means No.
That's right. Yeah. So I guess that's important to say. Yeah. So I started at the morning show on the Zone in 2008, and then a couple years later, around 2010, um, I proposed a punk rock show for the station.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't let me put it on the air at first. It was just online, but they promoted it on the radio, which was really cool. And so I'm like, I'm going to do a punk rock show. That's how I met Melanie very early on. Melanie K
Uh-huh.
was one of the very first people that was actually nice to me and like helped me get connected to some people in that scene. And I would play punk rock, and I would interview bands and people. I always tried to have a little bit of a local flavor in there and play some like local up and coming Victoria bands. And I did that for a few years. Had a great old time, and then put it on hiatus for a while, and then it came back in like 2016 or 15. No, no, whatever it was. I can't remember the dates, but
Mm-hmm.
then they actually gave me an hour on the radio. So it was Fridays at midnight. I would pre-record it, but Fridays at midnight they actually let me have an hour of uncensored and commercial-free radio to play whatever I wanted. And so I would be playing like Dayglow Abortions, "Oh Fuck My Shit Stinks" on a commercial radio station. It's a great feeling,
Amazing.
and
Love it.
I loved the interviewing process, and I interviewed a lot of people over those years. And yes, that was my first tangible connection to No Means No. Was I got John Wright on the phone. He was promoting a beer that he was connected to with the Hanson brothers. And then I also interviewed Tom Holliston for another because he was putting out a solo album and coming to town. and then I interviewed John again, like a year later.
Hmm.
This is when NoMeansNo was still together,
Yeah.
and then they got inducted into what was called the Western Canadian Music Hall of Fame, and it was in Victoria. Was um, to do the big
Ceremony. Yeah.
ceremony induction. Thank you. And Melanie Kay got me in to interview John and Tom in person in their dressing room before that ceremony. Rob wasn't really doing interviews at that time. It was near the end of No Means No. Rob was not interested in talking to people, basically.
Hmm.
So I got to meet John and Tom and interview them. I actually met Rob that day too, just briefly, and so that was the connection that I had already. And then when it came time for me with this idea for the book, I wasn't a complete stranger to them. They're like,
Hmm.
"Oh yeah, that guy, that Victoria guy, I remember him." Yeah.
That's
And the punk show is now on hiatus again because I'm so busy with the book, but I do want to bring it back probably later this year because it's just an awesome fun. It's a really good stress reliever for me to
mhm.
do. I love doing it. It's my passion project, and also it gets me into like festivals and stuff with media passes, and I
Hmm.
and I love all that stuff. Yeah.
That sounds really cool. That sounds like right up my alley. I wish, man, I wish there was more of that down here when it comes to streaming radio. So this
Yeah.
is awesome. It's awesome that this you have this kind of full circle moment, being this kid in Victoria going to shows in basements and industrial halls and loving this band, and then
Yeah.
to come full circle, and then uh, to put this book together. And I got to say, like this is the quote that I would say if you needed something for a jacket or anything, it was like I
Yeah.
would describe it as a Rashomon esque oral history of Victoria's seminal punk rock band is what I would say.
I love it.
Because you,
That's great.
well, because and like we were talking about earlier, like you put together, like each chapter is so detailed of every specific history of not only where the band comes from, the band itself, the band involved, including this very wacky stress reliever of the Hanson brothers, the hockey themed Ramones band. I
Yeah.
love.
Yeah.
Um, so let me ask you this: when the idea comes to you to put the book together, and it doesn't read to me like a traditional biography where there's like this, and then in 1976, there's so many different, like you talk to so many different people in the band and related to the band who loved the band. What was it? Maybe you could describe your process of kind of putting to not only getting all these interviews and talking to all these people, but then putting it together for the book, because I imagine there's a lot to sort through and edit.
Yeah. It was pretty insane. So all told, it took close to 4 years, maybe 3.5 years.
Wow.
And once I got the green light from the guys that they were okay to do it, I just started like literally writing lists of all the okay. So I know I need to talk to obviously the four guys from the band, but I need to talk to Craig Bouget because I've seen that name in the liner notes, and he's like their sound guy, and Laurie Mercer is their manager or was their manager. I should probably talk to him. And how about then they did a lot of shows with Victims' Family, so maybe I should try to get a hold of the guys from Victims' Family and that kind of mentality, right? So I'm just
Yeah.
doing that, and then reaching out on social media or finding emails and uh, just literally going through phone books and trying to find these people or like sending emails to publicists and managers. And there was no rhyme or reason to the order of how I started because I was just whoever said yes they would talk to me, that's who I would talk to. So
Hmm.
and this was also right at the beginning of COVID. Like it was literally March of 2020 when I got the green light from No Means No. So um, everybody was home, everybody was kind of bored, so that benefited me. So the vast majority of the interviews were on the phone. Because I worked in radio, I had access to a production studio where I could, record these phone calls properly and edit them
Right.
if I needed to. And every time I talked to somebody, it would lead to more names because every single person, oh, you should probably talk to so and so. He was in this band that did a bunch of stuff, or this guy was really good friends with them. And so the list of names just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I was at the height of it, I was doing like 15 or 20 interviews a week. Um,
Wow.
on top of my full-time job. Like I'd go in on a Saturday, Sunday and do like 7 interviews in a row. an hour at a time, an hour a piece sometimes or longer.
Hmm.
It was crazy. And so then from there, I had to go, okay, well, this is a book. It's not an audio book. So I got to transcribe all of these interviews to, pen on paper,
Right. Yeah.
technically, right? Like words. So I actually put the word out to the No Means No fan community on Facebook and my friends and said, does anybody want to not get paid and just like transcribe some interviews for me? And people people came forward and it was awesome. So I had this little sort of army of people, that's transcriptionists that were helping me. And so, as those were getting done, they were getting sent to me. So now I've got the full interview that I did all transcribed.
Hmm.
Now I've got to pick out of there the interesting stuff.
Right.
And early on, I met a guy named Paul Prescott, whose name is on the cover of the book because he um, had some editing experience, and he ended up being an incredible ally for me and got the book. I'd still be working on it if it wasn't for Paul.
Hmm.
And Paul and I would take all these transcribed interviews and go, okay, here's Larry Boothroyd from Victim's Family. He's talking about um, all this cool shit. Oh, there's a really cool story that happened in 1996. Okay, so that goes in the 1996
Section. Yeah.
file, right? And that's kind of how we did it. I had no idea. Like, I didn't go to school to learn how to do this.
Yeah.
I'd never written a book before, but somehow it worked out. Like, we kind of figured out, okay, you have to throw everything into piles of timeline,
Yeah.
and then from there you arrange it so that it all makes sense and it's somewhat chronological. And that's kind of how it went. And it took out, hundreds and hundreds of hours working with Paul doing that. And, meanwhile, I'm still also interviewing new people and getting people sending me images because I wanted it to be a visual book
Oh
too.
yeah.
Um, and at the end of the day, I ended up with 21,000 unique images that I had to pare down to about 600 that are in the book.
Yeah.
And I interviewed about 500 people total. It was crazy, crazy, crazy.
That
Loved it though. Yeah.
amazing. Well, that's the only way you can do something like that, is to just like really love the subject matter and what you're doing. Is there something that
Yeah.
you discovered during the process of interviewing and researching that surprised you about the band or a certain time? Is there anything that like really like stuck out to you as like, whoa, I didn't know that?
Yeah, lots because No Means No were known for being kind of coy and they like to play with their so-called image, which they didn't have an image. Like back in the 80s and 90s, pre-internet times, you didn't even know who they were half the time. They would like their photos would be a guy playing guitar in front of a sack of potatoes, or a guy playing, you know, two people playing Scrabble with an elderly couple. That was like, oh, that's no means what? Like, and they had fake names sometimes, and they fucked with all that stuff on
Right.
purpose because they didn't think that mattered who they were. It mattered what they sounded like, right?
Yes.
But at the same time, they did have a brand because their brand was that they had no brand,
Hmm.
in a weird, if that makes sense.
It
And
absolutely does.
yeah, and they sold lots of T-shirts and stuff because they had cool imagery and stuff that they would go along with their albums. And um, so to answer the question, there was tons of stuff that surprised me. Um, Early stuff that went on. I learned some personal stuff that didn't end up in the book just because it was not
Mm.
didn't need to be there. It wasn't the kind of I didn't want a gossipy type of book. Um, but even like the fact they got offered Lollapalooza, the first Lollapalooza, and said no to it, and you know, I mean, there's so many things. One thing that actually surprised me weirdly was I thought um, that they really avoided attention, like on purpose, and they
Hmm.
avoided media attention. They didn't want any of that. But looking into it, when they were sort of at their peak, when they were starting to tour Europe in like late 80s, early 90s, around there are hundreds of interviews with them in European zines, and North American ones too. But like they weren't shying away from promoting themselves.
Hmm.
They were fine to do that. They loved it at the time, and so there was a lot. Like they were out there. They just weren't. Um, they just weren't in the mainstream, and they didn't want to be. So,
Hmm.
but I've got stacks of weird German and Dutch and Italian zines with interviews with No Means No when they would come through town, and they would fuck around and sometimes say outright lies about who they were and
Hmm.
stuff. But um, I think I'm kind of going off on a tangent. But yeah, there's a lot of these stories in here I'd never heard about before I talked to them, and I think that that's what's really cool. Hopefully for the fans too. Um, I think there's a lot of stuff in this book that people will blow people's minds. I'm trying to think of another thing. Like, I mean,
Well, the other
yeah,
story that I really liked was the story of how an off-duty cop hit their van, and the cops
yeah,
were trying to arrest them until someone says, "No, she did it. I saw everything."
that's right.
And then they're like, "Okay, you're not welcome in Reno anymore." It's like, I feel like that's such a punk rock thing to be like escorted out of a city. I love that.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, the Reno thing. And then the stolen van in Poland, right? I mean, that
Right?
was
Yeah.
a big one where, they were like dealing with the Polish mafia who were like extorting them for money to get their van back. The fact that they played in East Berlin before the wall came down, they
Yeah.
actually had to sneak across without their instruments and just pretend they were tourists, and then they played in the church of a basement. And the kids had put this on, and the kids that put that concert on like risked actually going to prison for it like that at that time to have a western punk rock band play in East Germany was illegal. And so like that's pretty cool.
Yeah. That's
You
fucking
know
punk rock. Like, if you want to really talk
yeah,
about what define what punk is being willing to be arrested for your art
yeah,
and to put on
yeah,
art. I fucking love that. There's everything about this book, as someone coming into the band uh blind, made me want to
yeah.
know more and made me want to dig deeper. Everything about this book made me uh understand not only Canada's punk, Victoria's punk scene better, but this band better. So I was thrilled to read it.
That's really cool, man. I appreciate that, and I hope um you said you've been diving into their music a little bit. I hope you do more, and you like it. It's not for everybody, but they're pretty amazing. And yeah, I'm glad. I'm actually jealous that you get to kind of discover No Means No now, right? Because
Right.
I feel like that's a cool feeling when you discover new music, and even if it's old music, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, what have you listened to? Did you listen to Wrong probably? And I don't know.
I haven't been able to
What did you?
find Wrong online, but I did find The People's
Right.
Choice, and I did dig into that. I would say probably the songs that I've loved the most before, Body Bag, I really loved. And I also loved
Yeah.
It's Catching Up. That's sort of like
Yeah.
herky jerky part of the chorus of It's Catching Up
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
stuck out to me. Like, it took me back to like when I first learned was started discovering real punk, because I was a 2000s pop punk kid, and then I deep dived.
Sure.
So
Well,
It's Catching Up I really like
yeah,
too.
the other thing is that's the online thing is an issue too, right? So, People's Choice is on like Spotify and that. The best way, beyond actually just going out and finding the vinyl records, which is also hard to do, go on YouTube. All the records, full length albums of all their stuff is on YouTube. It's not ideal quality, but you should listen to the whole Wrong album. Um, Will, if you want my advice, and then listen to an album called Why Do They Call Me Mr. Happy? And then if you like those two, then go from there and get into it, and you'll be a better person.
Fantastic. Well, I will report back to you after I listen to
Yes,
both of those albums. And I've really enjoyed getting to chat with you, Jason. So for let's make sure we sell some let people know where you can get this book. So the book is called No
sure.
Means No, From Obscurity to Oblivion. And where can people go if they want to read the book, if they want to learn more about it or you?
Thank you very much. Yeah, and by the way, thank you. This has been a great interview. I really appreciate it. I appreciate it a lot. You can get it almost anywhere. You can get it directly from the publisher, pmpress.org. You can get it from Amazon if you want. But to keep with the DIY thing, my advice to everybody is go to your favorite local bookstore that sells new books and ask them to order it in because PM Press will ship worldwide to anyone. So yeah, get a physical copy from your local independent bookstore. Shop local, as they say. If you live somewhere that you need to get delivery, then yeah, Amazon will do it. PM Press will do it, et cetera, et cetera. All the big ones, Barnes and Noble, and in the States, and Waterstones over in the UK, and all that kind of stuff. They all can grab it for you.
Amazing. And I'll take this opportunity to plug my local bookshop, which is Astoria Bookshop. So that's where I'll be going to get my hard copy. So that's what I will do. And Jason, absolute pleasure. I feel like this won't be the only time we chat in our lives. So this has been really great. Thank you.
I love it.
Thank you again. It warms my heart when like people who interview people say they enjoyed this interview. So thank you. I really appreciate that.
Right. No, for sure. You're very good at what you do, man.
It warms my heart when people who interview musicians for a living and interview people for a living say that they enjoy doing my show. That brings me a great deal of satisfaction. So thank you, Jason. It was a delight to meet you and to bond and to make a new friend over punk rock and comedy. Probably my two favorite art forms that I have dedicated so much of my life to and have brought me such joy. Folks, if you enjoyed this, you absolutely need to go and check out NoMeansNo's music. Like Jason said, there are a couple of their albums available on YouTube. Maybe we can get those back into print somehow. Maybe this could be the beginning of that. That would be awesome to see. And you should absolutely check out NoMeansNo, From Obscurity to Oblivion, an oral history available from PM Press. There is a link for it in the description. And like Jason said, and I tell you, I will be doing this as well, I'm going to go to my local bookshop and ask them to order it for me. And that is a great way to shop local, keep the printed word going, and support a great book as well. Thank you all so much for listening this week. That is our show for today. If you enjoyed this podcast and think you know a friend who would be interested in listening to it as well, you can go to awesomedisaster.com. That has links to everywhere you can get the show. We are on Apple Podcasts. We are on Spotify. We are on Pandora, Amazon, all the apps. If you want to give us a review or a rating or follow on your podcast platform of choice, that would go a long way into helping the show. I am on Instagram at WillCarry23 and on TikTok at ComicWillCarry. And if you want to go a little bit further in support of the show, you can check out our merch store as well as our Patreon, which are also available at awesomedisaster.com, and continue to be excellent to one another. And my happy place is going to be sitting atop an onsen in a natural hot spring while cold air surrounds me, while I sit in geothermal heated water with no clothes on, with a bunch of other folks, a bunch of other men just taking in the awe-inspiring sight of Mount Fuji. So thank you all again so much for being here. And I'll see you next week between Awesome and Disaster. Take care, everybody.